Welcome to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions. Your host tonight is the author of the Pro-Black Compendium and Zuberi and the Maroons of Ma'at, the Pan-African Nationalist, Oni. Oni, what are we discussing tonight?
Hotep family. Look, if you're not dancing, if you weren't dancing just now, go rewind, rewind, get your dance on. Check this out. So you see this graphic right in front of you where it says the pro-black perspective. If you're just listening to the audio, that's fine. But if you can see this graphic, it's a circle, the words pro-black perspective. Learning Curve actually made it, and she made t-shirts along with it. So if you're interested in getting some merch, getting some t-shirts, represent to the African world that you listen to good content, hit up the link in the description. All right. So again, today we're going to continue this open secret to white global dominance. I hope that the last one was really good for you, right? I hope the last one was really good for you, and it's just going to get better. I think I might have miscounted how many pages this introduction has, and that's fine. It just means that the last one's going to be a little longer. But outside of that, and maybe like 2 pages longer, and it actually might not even be longer. I just it doesn't even matter. The thing I want to tell you is we're part of a network. We're part of the KWAZ radio network, and I want you to really seriously subscribe to the other channels. It helps a lot, and you would really be helping us in that capacity. Also, they're in the description, so check it out.
This is D-Web with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Pro-Black Perspective on KWAZ Radio.
Okay, family. So we're going to go right back to this graphic. So, I'm glad that you guys are here with me. I know. Let's get right to business. Right? You just not even want to greet me. All right, check this out. So this is page 16 in Roman numerals. So this is just the introduction to the Wealth of Nations. Somebody wrote an introduction to tell us about it. It's not even important. You could look it up. I don't really, I'm not a promoter of white books. Although I do think this is an important topic, I don't personally promote white people. So you're just going to have to, if you're going to go on some journey to explore the white world, you do it on your own. Don't ask me for help. I can help you out with black folk, though. All right. But anyway, back to the book. In 1751, Smith was appointed a professor of logic at Glasgow University. Now, and look at that, too. Look at this, too. He's appointed a professor of logic at Glasgow University. It's really something, that here's this guy. He's just a gentleman. He's just a regular schmegler, right? And he becomes a professor of logic at a university, right? And meanwhile, we might have esteemed all of these African scholars once upon a time. We might say, hey, you know what? Dr. Clark and, Amos Wilson and, even if we say Julius Nyerere, which is really a spot on, right? We could name all of these people. None of them became professors. I was talking to, a scholar, and they were saying, you know what? One thing that we don't do as a people is that if there are people with skills at nation building, right? Why aren't they teaching the next generation about nation building? Of course, I was like, well, who really has skills in nation building? And they said, what about Nana? What about the current president of Ghana? Why doesn't he groom the new leadership of Ghana? And of course, we both agreed that Ghana does produce some good leaders. So maybe there is some grooming process involved. Who knows, right? Either way, the reality is this. A lot of African leaders today expect that they're going to be in power forever, or when they're out of power, it'll be because their head is in a basket. I don't know, not to say that there aren't natural deaths in Africa or in Ghana in particular, right? Because there are definitely natural deaths. But the reality is this: you're this great leader in Africa, right? You should be a professor after your term. There should be something in place to say, hey, you know what? This person's going to teach along with the other Joe Schmoes, regulars, smegglers, whatever have you. And I don't like using that term, but I used it twice, right? But either way, Smith, he's not a world leader. He didn't even write, he's not going to write his book for another 20 years. Notwithstanding that, right? He becomes a professor of logic. Right? Whereas you have all of these great scholars and, many of them who didn't really accomplish anything, weren't really world leaders, but you do have what you would say either world leaders or at least African leaders. And they do not join these institutions, these learning institutions to educate a future generation. But you see what I'm saying? Again, it's an open secret. It's an open secret. If I were you, I would say, hey, you know what? Let me build this institution on nation building. And sure, I'm going to have the people who have good ideas on nation building. I'm sure I'm going to have Oni. I'm going to have this person. I'm going to have that person. But I'm also going to have Nyere. Obviously Nyere is passed, but I'm also going to have Nana. Magafuli passed away too, but I'm also going to have Magafuli. I'm going to have his replacement. I'm going to have these people that I feel were dignified leadership in Africa. I'm going to have them teaching a new generation on how to govern, teaching theories on governance, debating and discussing governance with a new generation of future governors. But you know what? You don't have that. You don't even say that. But believe me when I tell you that other people do. I remember when Obama first came onto the scene, right? When Obama first came onto the scene, people were saying, hey, man, this guy was groomed by XYZ. Or this person, he was chosen XYZ. Presidents are not, we don't elect chosens. They're selected, Yeah. And look, I don't know, after after Trump, I'm not 100% sure people ain't really elected. You know what I'm saying? Looks like they were elected. It looks like nobody really selected them. But the reason why but what I'm saying is that, yeah, these other people, like I said, it's an open secret. Other people are grooming the future leadership. Other people are grooming their future leadership. And I told you guys about that example back in Kemet where they were like, yeah, we're going to groom our leadership. This is the open secret. And yet what you find is that as you go along in Africa, right, you don't have that sort of leadership grooming. You look at all the brightest people today. Actually, I almost want to say almost none of them were pulled aside by the leadership, by the infrastructure of their community, of their leadership, right? By that infrastructure to be leaders themselves. Almost every, I remember a long time ago, I got into this discussion with this guy, and I was like, yeah, man, I don't like college. I don't really like college. I mean, I don't necessarily tell people not to go to college because I don't know what other opportunity they would have, which is, garbage on my part. But I don't personally, like I said, I don't promote white folks stuff. But they were like, hey, man, so many good black people went to college. This person went to college. That person went to college. I went to college. You went to, yeah, that's the truth. The white person is identifying the genius of the black community and developing it to suit his colonial needs. You understand? Developing it to suit his needs. And the issue is that if you have all this brilliance and you're not also developing those brilliant people to suit our needs, that's why we don't solve our own problems. Again, this is the open secret. It's not even I'm not even telling you anything that you shouldn't know. I'm actually just reading somebody's biography. But we're going to continue. Like this is just not even hidden. It's not, oh my gosh, here's a secret. This is straight up. Anyway, so a year later, he accepted the chair of moral philosophy when it became open owing to the resignation of its incumbent on account of poor health. Again, he gets the chair of moral philosophy. You know? I mean, oh my gosh. All right. But, we can be all day if I don't just progress, so I'm going to progress. Smith held that position until 1763, being replaced by Thomas Reed from 1721 to 1796. From student lecture notes only recovered in the 19th and 20th century, we know that Smith's lectures were wide-ranging. Smith was also an enthusiastic participant in Glasgow's broader literary culture. Besides the Political Economy Club, he was a member of the Literary Society, which was a general-purpose club that heard papers on all manner of new developments ranging from Black's chemical discoveries to sunspots theories, literary discussions of ancient and modern works, biological theories, and at least one of his own papers on the value of economic liberty. This is the period to which we also date the first of Smith's significant publications. So you see what I'm saying, right? We sometimes talk, hey, look, we should be a part of organizations. Yes, you should be a part of organizations, but you don't even have to just be a part of organizations. I mean, obviously organizations are important, but being a part of a political economy club or a literary society, sometimes we say, oh, why do we sit around and talk all the time? Why do we sit around and talk all the time? If you're sitting next to somebody important, or if somebody important, or if you are important, I won't say important. Let's say, all right, because I know you guys don't like the word elite, but you got to get over that. Just get over that. You don't like the word elite, that's fine. But you have to understand that the way how societies are structured is that you have elites and commoners, okay? An elite is essentially, and here I'm going to say it just really tepidly. Maybe I could open up the Book of Power and get a better definition. But an elite is essentially a person, like a person with, let's actually say power. Like a person with power. Let's just put it that way. A person with some sort of local power. And it could just be in that capacity. But say like some people might not like this one, but like a teacher. With the power to shape students, or a doctor, or what have you, right? Somebody with the intellectual blessing. Now, how does that distinguish from a commoner per se? You would say that a commoner, actually, I might have to just open my book because it would just be a lot easier. But you would say that a commoner doesn't necessarily have that power, a commoner doesn't necessarily have that power. So actually, I'm going to go to the Book of Power, go into the glossary, and give you the definition that I'd written a minute ago. Sorry if I sound out of it, but and this is why you write books. It's not so much, it's so that you can always have a source. Because what happens is this: I noticed after I wrote this that some people don't like those strong terms, and so I'm trying to make them weaker for you. But in making them weaker, you might be a little bit more confused than when I started. So let's say this. Let's see. So an elite. Okay, so there you go. And this is actually really important. Elite is usually employers and professionals of note. Okay. The unspoken. This is the glossary of the Book of Power. In fact, I'm going to show you. I'm going to give you guys a show. Give me 2 seconds here. So this is the glossary of the Book of Power, page 530. It says an elite is usually employers and professionals of note. The unspoken commonality for an elite or access to elite status is in accordance with an education along racial and sometimes ethno-racial or ethno-national benefit. In the African tradition, this is one masterful in medu nefer. That means good words, speaking good, right? But even Eurasians reward those who behave in accordance with their racial, ethno-racial, or ethno-national benefit. The elite are the natural leaders and the thinkers of a race and are held to higher standard than their commoners. Consideration for elites, particularly those who wield power, improves analytical frameworks, thus allowing for class analysis, but from an indigenous African perspective. So I say when we talk about elites, then we can actually improve our analysis of our own people, right? So in pre-dynasty Kemet, for instance, those buried in the treasure-filled royal Ptah were ethnically Kenesu and ethnically distinct from the population of Kemet. This is consistent with the definition of nation, right? So you got to go see the definition of nation. And more importantly, illustrative of high culture African formations. Everyone knows of elites, yet somehow many people are anti-elitist. So even though we all know that elites exist, we're anti-elitist, and that makes us backward, right? It's more correct to be pro-Africanist elitism, right? So you want your elites to be pro-Africanist, right? Since all people aren't anti-elitist. No, sorry. Since all nations of significant influence since antiquity operated from their elites. Now, remember this. I want you to understand this. All nations that we know of have operated through these elites. And so it's better to use that knowledge than to say, oh, let's actually create something that doesn't exist and that can exist, right? Therefore, empowering our own may not only be in accordance to our traditions, but must be one of the most significant, authentic expressions of nationalism we can do. Basically, what I'm saying is that if you empower your pro-black elites, that is really what nationalism should be. So in short, the elites are the leaders of nations, and there's no nationalism without elite. It's people, not ideas, right? So that's your definition of elite. I'm going to just go back to this thing, and then maybe we can look for the definition of commoner. Okay, yeah. So let's actually the page right above it. So we're going to go right into it. So commoners. So this is the masses and the population. If elites lead the nation, commoners follow the nation. If elites are the employers, commoners are the employed. If elites are those governing, commoners are those governed, right? Now I want you to pay attention. So I did say teachers before, and sure, but like even this, I want to say this even better, right? Better than the teacher, the curriculum builder. You understand? I mean, it could be the teacher too, but the people who shape the curriculum, that's the elites. You understand? The commoner at the moment is a student. The commoner may be just a farmer. The commoner may be the worker. Sure. And, of course, teachers are workers, so you can also put them either or. Depends on, obviously you can look into it more clearly. But, the leaders of the nation, the employers, the governors, right? If you have these clubs and you're sitting down next to the leaders, see, if you're sitting down next to the employed and the governed and the followers, right? That's fine. Okay, that's fine. It's like, yeah, you have this organization and you have all this social, but then if the organization becomes significant, right? That like essentially what that organization is going to want to do is engage with the elite. You understand? So let's say nations are mutual aid societies for racial elites. So though the racial elites are the primary beneficiaries of national formations, racial commoners are secondary beneficiaries, followed by non-racial elites and non-racial commoners. This is the true class arrangement globally. So this is just basically telling you how nations operate globally. At times, particularly in monoracial settings, racial would be ethno-racial or ethno-national, but the premise remains the same. There's a class divide that's permeable through education and in accordance to a racial will and standard. Basically what he's saying is this, right? Or basically what I'm saying is this, right? You will like essentially if you're in a nation, okay? The nation can identify, like a commoner versus elite is just a matter of education. Okay, just a matter of education and opportunity, right? If somebody is like, you know what, I hate, like let's say you're in China and you're like, hey, I hate China. Oh man, I hate China. I hate China. You're in China, right? I hate China. I hate China. I hate China, right? You go through this school system and everywhere you go, you're like, oh, I hate China. I hate China. China's not going to allow you to be a governor. You said China's not going to allow you to be a teacher. China's not going to allow you to do anything, right? Except for maybe go work in the mines. You understand? What? Now, if you're this brilliant young boy, born to a poor family, let's say, right? You're the commoner, right? You're born to commoners, but you have some smarts to you. You have some intelligence to you. China may say, hey, you know what? This person's this person has ambition, and this person has loyalty to our cause and our people, and they want to improve us. Guess what? Come to the elites. And actually, it's interesting is that, there's this, people are like this show called Hamilton or whatever, right? And I was listening to an interview of the guy talking about Hamilton. And what happens is that there's this little boy named Hamilton, he's like 12 or something. And he writes, he's in this island, I can't remember the name of the island, maybe like St. Croix or something. And a hurricane comes through, right? And it devastates. And so he writes his father a letter about how bad the hurricane is. And his cousin sees the letter and says, wow, this kid is too smart, right, to be toiling away as a clerk in St. Croix. We should send him to the colonies to get an education. Okay, they collect money, not for the victims of the hurricane, but they collect money so that this young boy can get an education in the colonies. And this young boy ends up being so committed to America that he does become like a secretary of the Treasury and joins the elites of the United States, right? Why is that important? Because when you say commoner versus elite, you realize that it's really a matter of, hey, who do we want to be the leaders? What are the responsibilities? Do we want everybody to be according to this huge standard? No. There's this proverb in Africa, right? Among the Kikongo that goes, drink, sleep, and play, If you weren't around when the community was being developed, then just keep doing that, forever, pretty much. But the point is that we're okay with you. We're okay with commoners going to the bar and drinking. We're okay with commoners, gossiping and doing what have you, going to dances, twerking and all that kind of stuff. We're okay with that. You don't want that from your leaders. That's the difference. It's just, who do you want to hold to a higher standard? Do you want everybody to be important to it? I mean, it's not realistic. It's not realistic. I mean, it's possible, but it's not realistic. Before when it becomes realistic, then you will say, hey, you know what? All of us be the leaders, sure. But now it's like, no. If somebody's, high every day, right? Or drunk every day, then just let it be. You know what I mean? So anyway, let's just finish this and go back to the book. There's a class divide that's permeable through education in accordance to a racial will and standards. Yet there's also an impermeable racial barrier. It's best to be commoner in a nation of your own racial makeup. Therefore, it's smartest for Africans to empower their own racial elite, see elite, and be racial commoners of their own nations. For the Ankobia, this is the Keru, you see Keru. One recurring mistake in African thought and thinking is to put importance in Eurasian commoner thought or thinking, or to listen to ambitions. Eurasian commoners as individuals with their diverse promises or alleged ambitions. So again, one of the things you got to realize is that the Eurasian commoner does not have that kind of power. When Adam Smith goes into these clubs and he's getting appointed to the professorship because he's impressing the elites of his country, not because he's impressing the commoners of his country. You understand? You want to go, you don't care about what the commoners are saying. Not to say commoners can't, get resources and somehow push you into the elite circles. But a lot of these commoners that we tend to be impressed with are ostracized by their elite, So it's a no-brainer, right? So alleged ambitions. As the Eurasian is inherently exploitative, see Eurasianisms, his commoner is powerless in comparison to his elite and poses no threat whatsoever to them, except in weak nations. And even then, once the commoner becomes elite, it'll be as though nothing changed. Think about it. Again, you could have commoners who do become elites and then nothing changes. Of course, Africans are inherently reciprocal, have historically had a healthy relationship between their elites and commoners, though it's unhealthy when the elites are Eurasianists, are unguarded to Eurasianism. A part of the Ma'afa, as we know, had Eurasianist elites selling commoners to Eurasians. Now, again, they do have, like, you can have elites that are Eurasianists, that is centered on Eurasianisms, and that could be a problem. So you have to worry about that as well. Today, Eurasianist elites have taken over Africa and made her commoners non-beneficiaries. So it's up to the Ankobia to bring about Africanist elites who will in turn benefit Africa's commoners. Of course, that is a very, very good description of, like, it's just open secret to black dominance. But, that's in the Book of Power. You got to go check that out. But anyway, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. So the guys, so sometimes you got to realize that, yeah, you can talk and debate and get in the ear of people who are the employers, the governors, and the so on and so forth. This is actually an interesting brother on the Discord. His name is Osiris, and yeah, come join the Discord. Click on it, and yeah, the brother is in contact with a lot of important and powerful African people. This is what you're supposed to be doing too. One of the things I do want to do is get my book in the hands of some of these leaders. But I don't like how it is. People say, hey man, don't toot your own horn. Right. So you do it. Like if you say to yourself, hey, I haven't done doing much for the African cause. That's what you could do. Find somebody who you think should read the book and go and get it to them. Okay. And be on their ass about it. Anyway, so in 1755, he published two pieces. This is back to the book. In 1755, he published two pieces in the short-lived Edinburgh Review, a periodical that was largely the product of Smith's friends Alexander Wedderburn, 1733 to 1805. The first of these was a review of Samuel Johnson's The Dictionary of the English Language. That review was frequently reprinted in the periodical literature, the review of the day, and sections of it even made their way into the Encyclopedia Britannica. And another piece entitled A Letter to the Authors of Edinburgh Review. Now, you see that again. They have an Encyclopedia Britannica, but we don't, right? Smith encouraged the Edinburgh Review's Scottish editors to expand their coverage so that recent works by French philosophers such as George Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Voltaire, all of whom had been discussed in the literary club, would have more attention. You see that again. Now, they have review books where they're looking at the different French philosophers, and they're like, hey, let's give them more attention. Like, they have this literary circle. They have these reviews. They know that the ruling classes, the elites, read these reviews, and they're saying, hey, let's put in their hand more attention to the philosophers that may not be well known there. I just said this. I just said, hey, go get my book inside of these people's hands. But that's the difference. Again, this is not white people of today. This is white people of 200 years ago. And they're still doing this to this day. They're still doing that to this day. Anyway, Smith enjoyed his time at the University of Glasgow, even though he had a very demanding workload. His students appeared to have appreciated his efforts. One even commented on Smith's animated and extemporaneous eloquence. Looking back at this period from the perspective of his final years, Smith recalled, the period of 13 years which I spent as a member of that society, I remember as by far the most useful and therefore as by far the happiest and most honorable period of my life. And now, after 23 years' absence, to be remembered in so very agreeable manner by my old friends and protectors gave me a heartfelt joy which I cannot easily express to you. One of the lasting products of Smith's Glasgow years was the composition of his first book, 1759. Smith, look at this, 1759. So he's a professor of logic at 1751, and his first book is in 1759. But okay. Smith published The Theory of Moral Sentiments, a work which largely came out of his lectures on ethics and which gave considerable attention to sympathy's impact on the moral sense. The Theory of Moral Sentiments gained for Smith international renown. Now again, he writes this book, and he gets international renown from it. From a book on moral sentiments in 1759. I don't know how big the book is, but yeah. Yeah. And it saw 6 editions by 1790, the year of Smith's death. It was translated into several languages and distributed far and wide. In some respects, Smith's first book is very different from The Wealth of Nations, so much so that a group of 19th century German scholars and others following them identified what is referred to as das Adam Smith problem, right? Anyway, namely that in the theory of moral sentiments, Smith was concerned to show that human beings are naturally benevolent, having a capacity for sympathy, and in this capacity which allows us to enter into the mind of another and also aim to please the impartial spectator. So again, here's another thing you want to see, that white people, they glorify themselves, or they say things that if you're deep inside of this African consciousness movement, you're like, what? White people are naturally benevolent? What? Just get that out of your head. Like one of the main problems of the African conscious movement is that we're listening to the African conscious movement. No. But seriously, like, yeah, they're going to say that they're benevolent. Anyway, all of that is very different perspective than the one offered by the individuals motivated by self-interest and material gain, who some argue inhabits this Wealth of Nations. Recent scholarship dissipates the problem by showing how sympathy is also needed in the Wealth of Nations. Whatever conclusion one draws with respect to Das Adam Smith problem, it is essential to remember that the theory of moral sentiments is in the background of the Wealth of Nations, which ought not to be read in isolation as representing all that Smith thought. Indeed, it might be advantageous to approach Smith not from a starting point that seeks tensions between his work. Actually, I want to say this, though. One thing I could say is this, that if you write a book and then you write another book 20 years later, it could be radically different. Not to say that I agree that they're the same, one and the same, but I could tell you this, that the pro-black compendium comes from a different place than the Book of Power. And if I were to write a book on political economy, like I'm talking about now, it will be very different from the space that I was in when I wrote the Book of Power. I do look at these as steps. I do look at it as a process. I do look at it as, first read Zubiri, or first read the pro-black compendium, right? Read Zubiri, and then read the Book of Power, and it could prepare you. Some people will tell me that, if they look into other lecturers, they can be prepared for the Book of Power. And, that's fine too. But my point being that, like consciousness develops in degrees, in stages. And so, yeah, you could start off with this idea of moral sentiment, and then you come into the problem of, well, why is the baker wake up in the morning to sell bread? Is it because of moral sentiment, because of sympathy, or is it because of his self-interest? And you just go on from there. Like sometimes you have these ideas, but you develop them, and you develop as a person. So I do want to point that out too. So anyway, indeed, it might be advantageous to approach Smith not from a starting point that seeks tension. And I want to say this too, like these are 20 years apart, right? I wrote the pro-black compendium and the Book of Power in like a 3-year gap, and they're radically different, or Zubiri is just radically different. Zubiri was me talking about an African empire, and its satellite in America, right? But in the Book of Power, I don't really talk about satellites in America. Like today, I don't really talk about setting up satellites in America. Not to say that satellites in America are not practical, but more so saying that it's not a real concern anymore. It's not really a concern. But that's what I'm saying. Like sometimes your consciousness develops. So I wouldn't even like people who are like, hey, well, let's tie these two together. It's like you're misunderstanding like what real people do, how much they change over even a small amount of years, let alone 20. Indeed, like what I was doing when I was 20 years old, 20 years ago. Come on. Indeed, it might be advantageous to approach Smith not from a starting point that seeks tensions between his work, but from the overriding coherence therein. This is possible if we see the wealth of nations as only one branch of Smith's several investigations into human nature. Smith, like others of the Scottish Enlightenment, were interested in the science of man, in the theory of moral sentiments. A principal concern is what sympathy is and how it works in the human mind. In Wealth of Nations, Smith sets his sights on self-interest. What is and how does it work? In his essay on astronomy, all right, cool, right? Published posthumously in 1795, the focus is working out on the places of curiosity, wonder, and the need to soothe the imagination. Smith there writes that he aims to map out the principles which lead and direct philosophical inquiry. After the publication of The Wealth of Nations, Smith continued to work on a planned book dealing with law and government. That project was never finished, and Smith directed his literary executors, Black and Hutton, to burn some 22 volumes of manuscripts after his death, which they did. So some dimension of Smith's overall system of human nature will forever remain hidden from our view, but parts of them are probably contained in the lectures on jurisprudence. So the guy is writing a book, and when he dies, they burn it because whatever, right? That's fine. Who cares? Anyway, I'm gonna give you guys another commercial break. I actually have to help my son with something. All right, be right back.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Pro-Black Perspective on KWAZ Radio.
Okay, sorry about that. Sometimes you gotta help out these kids, and you do. All right. So anyway, all right. So yeah, you see, like they burned it, whatever. So let's go further. Following the success of the theory of moral sentiment, Smith was asked to resign his teaching position to become a private tutor to the Duke of Buccleuch. Right? Again, he's now a private tutor. You see the difference? It's like, let's say Nana. Look at this, Nana. Nana is a good leader in Africa, right? Nana serves his term, and another president comes in. What happens after that? Do we say, hey, Nana, come be a private tutor for my kid? You understand? Or do we say, Nana, join this educational institution? Or do we say, Nana, indulge us in these political economy clubs or these literary clubs, or we study the latest science and the latest knowledge and keep abreast on information? Is that what we do? Or do we say, well, okay, good, he's retired? You don't have to answer that. All right. So he says, become a private tutor to the Duke of Buccleuch, I don't know, the 18-year-old stepson to Charles Townshend and one of the greatest of Scottish noblemen. This appointment in 1763 allowed Smith to travel and made him easy for life, since it included a generous yearly salary as well as a lifetime pension. Look at that. You see what I'm talking about with elites? You understand what I'm saying about elites? They say, oh, this guy wrote a good book on moral sentiments. Guess what? He's paid for life. And, I can't, look, I tell you this in fact, because, I'm going to I should stop using myself as an example. I met Dr. Ben as a young person, though, right? And I know you're like, what? You're using yourself as an example. No, I'm using Dr. Ben as an example. I met Dr. Ben. He was an old, frail man who, I don't want to say he died alone, but he did die in poverty. Had just a nurse caring for him. Meanwhile, he's a giant of the African nationalist tradition. He was one of the last Garveyites. who knew Garvey personally. Yeah. And he just like, whatever, just faded. Wasn't a private tutor, wasn't a professor, wasn't an instructor, wasn't anything. Just an old man dying in a nursing, like an old person's house. You know, no lifetime pension, nothing. You know, sometimes I want to say stuff, and I just say, you know, I'm just going to pause and just let you reflect on it. But yeah, this guy, Adam Smith, this is 1763. He's not even an old person. He gets a lifetime pension, right? The two began, so he's talking about him and this Duke of, the Duke, the two began a European tour with a year and a half in Toulouse. They then, and look, I don't care to pronounce European words right. I'm not gonna pronounce African words right either, but I don't care to pronounce like that hurts. But you know, European words I don't care, right? They then traveled through the southern region of France, spent 2 months in Switzerland, and concluded with a 10-month residence in Paris. So you see that they're able to. This is what I'm saying. Europeans they let's see. European tour with a year and a half in one country, then they go to France, then they spend 2 months in Switzerland, then they go 10 months back in France, right? Paris. Through the good offices of Hume and others, Smith was introduced to many of the leading lights of the French Enlightenment. So now I tell you, he's in the Scottish Enlightenment. Now he gets to go with the French Enlightenment, okay? And again, you know, you don't even have this. Like I said, you know, like one of some of the best voices in Africa right now. In fact, I think I did a list once upon a time. Well, this was like 5 years ago. Some of the best voices are obviously Julius Malema, obviously PLO Lumumba, obviously Andile Untama, obviously, yeah, I tried to study that. Obviously Farida. I don't remember her last name, but Farida, and obviously, like other people, sure. Oh, obviously my girl, or my lady, but you know what I'm talking about, the lady. How did I forget her name already? But you know, the ambassador, right? Yeah, great people. Great people. Are they working together? Are they leading movements? Are they leading intellectual movements per se? I mean, yeah, they're, you know, sure. The thing with Malema and Umtama is that they're actually kind of opposed to each other. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being opposed to other people. What should trouble you is that we're not meeting and comparing notes with each other. You know? We're not meeting and comparing notes with each other, and we're not meeting and keeping abreast on the different sciences and technology available to us. You know? The other day I saw that North Korea has this new missile that renders other missile defense systems impotent, possibly. You know? Like a hypersonic missile. That's good to know. But guess what? That information means nothing to most of us. You know? Missile defense. Like, we don't even know about missiles. We don't even know about guns. Missile defense. Or hypersonic missiles? You're not abreast on that. Like you're not sitting around. You don't have an institution where you sit around, where engineering students sit around and discuss how they can possibly come up with a hypersonic missile or a hypersonic missile defense. You don't have that? You know, you might as well have your hands up. Like, you might as well go through your life with your hands up. But you see the difference, you know? He's introduced to the French Enlightenment, which is good. He met Voltaire in Geneva, the encyclopedist and mathematician Jean Le Rond d'Albert, 1717. I don't forget the years. Who cares? And many more in Paris. Equally importantly, he mixed with those who belonged to the physiocratic school, right, or les economistes, as they were also known, including Francois Quesnay and Anne Robert Jacques Turgot. Both Quesnay and Turgot argued against mercantilism, the prevailing economic policy in Europe of the day, which championed government support for merchants and manufacturers. The physiocrats argued, in particular, that national wealth was based on the value of the produce of land, most of which was derived from agriculture. Now, this is actually pretty important, okay? This is actually pretty important because what you're going to find is that Smith's book is kind of a rebuttal to these same people. But at least he meets them. At least he gets to discuss them. At least he gets to hear from them. At least he's, again, this is like in 1763 or something like that, right? So he's engaging them as he's writing his own book. That's a rebuttal to them, of course. But it's interesting, you know? And you see this too. Peep this, right? Europe had an economic policy before Smith came along, right? Which was mercantilism, which was like, hey, government supports merchants and manufacturers. And I'm guessing maybe Smith was like, oh no, we shouldn't have governments, blah, 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 right? But then on the other hand, there were other alternative possibilities, which was, hey, forget mercantilism, forget manufacturing. Let's focus on land. Let's focus on building up land. That's another opportunity. But so what you see is that Smith is able to get in where he fits in, right, and shape the policy of his world. And the truth is this, that it could have went the other way. It could have been that these people, Quesnay and Turgot, got the or Turgot, I don't know, got the influence, and they turned the world not towards manufacture and merchants in a sense, right? Not towards laissez-faire or what have you, but towards agriculture, towards feeding more people, right? And then the whole colonialism thing kind of puts, it gets discouraged. Or the whole, grabbing Africa gets discouraged. And then the whole narrative that we have, in the future where we're all victims, or we're like, hey, these white people are so evil, probably never even happens. Not to say that there wasn't already slavery at this time. So obviously, there might be some of that. But you understand that, one thing that you want to do is shape the world. And this is, again, if you're talking about global dominance, you're talking about global shaping. And one of the ways that you shape the world is that you get out and shape it. Adam Smith could have sat in his bed, and lamented about how the British don't like Scottish. He could have lamented about how the French and, about this incident in Scottish history. He could have done all that stuff. But he didn't. He got out of bed, met people, got paid. It's an open secret. But that's another thing too. It's like I said, because we have to compare ourselves to this era, and we say to ourselves, do we have this? At the time of Smith's visit, Quesnay's Tableau Économique, or economic table, had recently been published since 1758, and Turgot was in the midst of writing his reflections on the formation and distribution of wealth. Look at that, the formation and distribution of wealth. This was it could have been a socialist book, right? Smith and his student returned to Britain in November 1766, and Smith, along with a trunk full of books and a head full of developing ideas, made his way from London to Kirkcaldy, where he settled in with his mother. Smith, it is worth noting here, never married, although his correspondence hints that family life was something he aspired to, and stories tell of a blighted early romance. See that? He could have got married. He could have gotten married. He could have been whining about Scottish, blah, 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 and, yada, yada. But he didn't. He got himself involved in an intellectual culture and himself became an intellectual. And he was selected from youth, identified from youth. And again, like I said, Hamilton the same way. Now, I will say this. Carlos Cooks was identified as a youth of intellectual prowess, and he was given access to different communities. And he also became pretty renowned inside of the UNIA. So it is something to realize that people do this. It is when I talk about this plan of Boko Waset Nat Keru, I'm telling you something that people do I'm just saying, do you do it? Like, it comes down to that. But anyway, so The Wealth of Nations was a long time in the making. Before it was published in 1776, it is likely that Smith had been formulating ideas about what would become the Wealth of Nations as early as his days lecturing in Edinburgh, and certainly by the time he was professor in Glasgow. However, the earliest probable mention of the actual composition of the work appears in a letter that Smith wrote to Hume from Toulouse on 5 July 1764, July 5th. Smith writes, "I have begun to write a book in order to pass away the time, but it appears that he only began to work in earnest once he had returned to Kirkcaldy at the end of his European travels. At that early stage, Smith enjoyed the writing process. He commented to Hume on 7th June 1767 that my business here is study, in which I have been very deeply engaged for about a month past. My amusements are long solitary walks by the seaside. You may judge how I spend my time. I feel myself, however, extremely happy, comfortable, and contented. I never was, perhaps, more so in all my life." By the beginning of 1769, the monumental task he had set for himself in Wealth of Nations had begun to weigh on him more heavily. Smith wrote, and again, remember that they probably wrote this stuff by hand, But no, maybe they had typewriters actually. Never mind. But still, remember those typewriters back in the day? You had to like literally delete, like delete whole passages in order to delete something. But anyway, by the business of 1763, the monumental task he had set for himself in Wealth of Nations began to weigh on him. Weigh on him more heavily. Smith wrote to Lord Hales in January of that year to say that his schemes of study left him very little leisure, and that they go forward too like the web of Penelope, so that I scarce see any probability of their ending. Looking back at his period of intense writing and rewriting, Smith later recalled to a friend, "Upon my return to Britain, I retired to a small town in Scotland, the place of my nativity, where I continued to live for 6 years in great tranquility and almost in complete retirement. During this time, I amused myself principally with writing my inquiry concerning the Wealth of Nations." Right? And then I only got one more paragraph. I believe I only have one more paragraph. Let me see. Just got to double check. And technically, I'm actually done, but I'll just do one more paragraph. So by the fall of 1772, the end was in sight, or so Smith thought. He wrote to William Pulteney on September 3rd that my book would have been ready for the press by the beginning of this winter, but the interruptions occasioned partly by bad health, arising from want of amusement and from thinking too much upon one thing, will oblige me to retard its publication for a few months longer. By 1773, his friends had begun to press him to bring his labor to a conclusion. Hume wrote on April 10th, "I expect to see you soon. Have you been busy, or whether in pulling down or building up?" On 9th of May, 1775, Smith could finally write to Hume, "I shall send my own book to the press in the end of this month or the beginning of the next." So yeah, there you go. So I mean, obviously, this was not I hope that was enough pages. I don't recall. But yeah, that's it. As we go through this gentleman's life, you see, I shouldn't say gentleman, but as we go through his life, we see that he's actively engaging the intellectuals, the elite. He's making a name for himself. He's studying. And, as we move forward, we're going to see that his book is actually given to the policy. Like the policymakers themselves get it. One book I got, for instance, Nkrumah would be comparable in the sense that he writes this book called Neocolonialism, and he hands it out to African leaders, right? Like he goes to the meeting, the African Union, and he just hands out this book. And he says, "Here, go ahead and read this." Of course, America, they say, kills him after this. And like the Americans were pissed off about it. They were like, "Damn, a president doing that." But that's what it is. Now, obviously, you'd want to protect a person who does this, but that's what it is. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to create something And the people, the movers and shakers, the influential people, they should get it. Now, I said, look, I'm going to get this book. I'll actually read the glossary for you. The table of contents says introduction, the next one is Africa's resources. Next one is obstacles to economic progress. Next one, imperialist finance. Next one is monopoly capitalism and the American dollar. Next one, the truth behind the headlines. Next one, primary resources and foreign interests. Next one, the Oppenheimer Empire. Next one, foreign investment in South African mining. Next one, Anglo-American Corporations Limited. Next one, the diamond groups. Next one, mining interests in Central Africa. Next one, companies and combines. Next one, the tin, aluminum, and nickel giants. Next one, Union Miniere du Hat Katanga. Next one, economic pressures in the Congo Republic. Next one, monetary zones and foreign banks. Next one, new industries, the effects of primary producing countries. Next one, the mechanisms of neocolonialism. And then, of course, the conclusion. That's after 200-something pages. Okay? 250 pages. Yeah. That's that. Like, say what you want about this, gentlemen. Say what you want. This is what you're supposed to go and influence the elite. I know a lot of times you're being told, no, you got to get the masses. Oh, you got to do this mass revolution. Oh, you got to do. Sure, but make sure that the elites are on board and following, or you have to replace them. But you have to replace them with other qualified and intelligent people. The mass education is good if you're going to, if you're going to install them into power or some of them into power. But that's what it is. Like I said, I don't even know if I want to write an 800-page book or a 200-page book or a 50-page book. I don't even know. Because I really think that we have to transform this continent. We have to transform our lives, and we're not doing enough. You see that in 200 years ago, this person who be a part of this enlightenment group, that enlightenment group, they get together, they meet together. They don't meet in little like they're not like isolated and like they're engaging each other, and they're serious. And they have that impact and that influence that we don't have. I mean, there are some brilliant black minds, and I'm going to tell you right now, they are disconnected from any black power or any powerful black person. They do not have the ear of any black person. They don't. And when you do see those examples, they're not the nationalists that we like. They're like Black Lives Matter or something. There's a lot that has to be done, but I appreciate you for checking in today. Like I said, make sure you guys get some merch, get some shirts, share this video. Okay, share this video. Whether you liked it or not, let somebody else decide whether they like it or not. Share this video. Let's watch it together. And of course, leave some comments. Promote this, and promote it probably with the upper class, Shout out if you are an elite. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, of course, and Shem Yem Hotep Ankuja Saneb Neb Amen Ma'at Dua Nature.